September 2023 brought a shocking development. The United States sent depleted uranium munitions to Ukraine as part of a massive $375 million military aid package. But these aren't just ordinary shells, they're laced with a deadly secret. Why does depleted uranium, a byproduct of nuclear reactors, turn ordinary rounds into devastating weapons that even the most advanced tanks can't withstand? The battlefield impact is only the beginning. These rounds don't just pierce armor, they ignite on contact, turning tanks into fireballs of molten metal. But there's more lurking beneath the surface, a dark side that military officials don't like to talk about, a toxic legacy that could leave its mark on Ukraine long after the last shot is fired. In this video, we'll explore the shocking reasons why depleted uranium is so feared, how its use in war zones can change the rules of combat, and the horrifying, long-term consequences that no one wants to confront. Could these weapons be a game changer, or a ticking time bomb? Stay tuned as we dive into the incredible power of this ammunition and the hidden dangers that could shape the future of warfare, and Ukraine itself, for generations to come. Before we get to that, there's one important thing we need to clarify. What exactly is uranium? Represented by the chemical symbol U, uranium is a naturally occurring radioactive element with some unique properties. In its pure form, it's similar to lead, cadmium, and tungsten, but it's even denser. Since the material's density will come into play later when we discuss depleted uranium ammo, it's really important to understand just how dense we're talking. So picture a small 4-inch cube, approximately the same width as your palm. If this cube was made of uranium, it would weigh about 45 pounds. That's how dense uranium is, 70% more than an equivalent volume of lead. We mentioned that uranium initially gained widespread recognition during the onset of the nuclear age, but how radioactive is this element? Well, in its natural state, uranium is composed of three main isotopes, U-234, U-235, and U-238. Each of these isotopes has different properties and varying levels of radioactivity. Still, generally speaking, uranium's radioactivity is relatively low compared to other materials like plutonium or radon. For comparison's sake, the activity of natural uranium is approximately 25.4 becquerels per milligram. This means that 1 milligram of natural uranium emits around 25.4 disintegrations per second. Plutonium, on the other hand, produces isotopes whose activity is measured in the millions. Uranium can even be found in the environment, in rocks, soil, water, and air, although in trace amounts. In soil, it's typically found as uranium oxides, with an average concentration of about 2 parts per million. As for water, uranium mainly comes from dissolved minerals, with concentrations varying from a few tenths to hundreds of megabecquerels per liter, 33.8 fluid ounces. In the air, uranium exists as dust particles. So it's clear that uranium isn't as dangerous as you might have thought initially. But what about depleted uranium? Well, depleted uranium, or DU for short, is actually less radioactive than natural uranium. This is because DU has lower levels of U-234 and U-235, the isotopes responsible for most of the uranium's radioactivity. Additionally, most decay products have been removed during the processing of DU, so DU has a specific activity of 14.8 becquerels per milligram, over 70% less than natural uranium. Plus, it would take almost 1 million years for its decay products like TH230 to reach radioactive equilibrium with U-234. So while DU retains its density and penetrative power, its radioactivity is significantly reduced compared to its natural counterpart. And that's the whole point of depleted uranium. The depleted part primarily refers to the reduced concentration of the U-235 isotope. You see, during the production of fuel for specific types of nuclear reactors and nuclear weapons, uranium must be enriched with this isotope, which is responsible for nuclear fission. Naturally, the fraction of the U-235 isotope is about 0.72% by mass. During the enrichment process, it can skyrocket up to 94% by mass. However, after this process, the enriched uranium is removed, leaving behind a byproduct uranium mixture with substantially reduced concentrations of U-235 and U-234. The byproduct in question is, of course, depleted uranium. The DU used for military purposes typically consists of 99.8% of U-238 and only 0.2% and 0.001% of U-235 and U-234 respectively. The official definition, according to the US Nuclear Regulatory Commission, specifies that DU has less than 0.711% of U-235 by weight. But as mentioned, its radioactivity level isn't what makes DU so appealing for military use. Instead, its peculiar attributes make it a game changer on the battlefield. First up, its unmatched density. Depleted uranium boasts a density of 19.1 grams per cubic centimeter, that's 0.69 pounds per cubic inch, making it one of the densest metals known, behind heavyweight champs like osmium and iridium. Osmium, the densest metal in the periodic table, has a density of 22.57 grams per cubic centimeter and is also used for military purposes. The same goes for iridium, which comes in close second with a density of 22.42 grams per cubic meter. The exceptional density of Du, one of the top 10 densest metals in the world, allows it to be used in armor-piercing ammunition such as tank shells, bullets, and mortar rounds. Basically, due to its high density, a Du projectile can have a smaller diameter than a steel one of the same weight, reducing aerodynamic drag and allowing for higher velocities. The result? A Du projectile not only penetrates deeper, but also concentrates all its kinetic energy onto a smaller impact area, thus enhancing its effectiveness against heavily armored targets. In most cases, it just pierces right through them. But this exceptional density isn't the only reason why depleted uranium is used in ammo, and it's not the only characteristic that makes this ammo superior to its regular counterpart. Depleted uranium is also self-sharpening. As the Du projectile penetrates its target, the uranium undergoes a unique process called adiabatic shearing. On impact with a hard target like an armored vehicle, the tip of the projectile mushrooms, while the back remains a solid, rigid structure. This mushrooming, combined with the projectile's spin, causes the outer layer of the mushroom tip to shed, revealing a new, sharp tip. Unlike tungsten rounds, which disperse their energy on impact, Du maintains its cutting edge, ensuring that the projectile stays sharp through the penetration process. That's what makes it about 20% more effective than a tungsten round, allowing it to slice through armor with relentless precision and devastating force. And as if this wasn't enough, depleted uranium has another remarkable trait: it's pyrophoric. This means that it spontaneously ignites in the air when ground into a fine powder. This powder forms once the Du projectile hits the target and breaks up into fragments. As the dust particles spontaneously catch fire in the air, they generate intense heat. Pair this heat with the friction between the projectile and the target, and you get a fireball effect that eviscerates even the toughest defenses. The high temperature, which often surpasses 1000 degrees Fahrenheit, can also cause additional destruction when coming into contact with any combustible materials or fuel inside the target, transforming the projectile's impact into a cataclysmic explosion of molten metal and fiery devastation. The Oak Ridge's Associated University's Museum of Radiation and Radioactivity describes the aftermath of a Du projectile strike like this. When the Du penetrates the target vehicle, the larger fragments tend to chew up whatever is inside, while the pyrophoricity of the uranium increases the likelihood that the vehicle's fuel and/or ammunition will explode. So there you have it. That's why depleted uranium is used in ammo. The combination of high impact, extreme heat, explosive force, and razor-sharp penetration capability simply makes it far superior to regular ammunition. The latter, typically made of steel or tungsten, can also penetrate armor, but usually deforms or loses mass upon impact, thus reducing its penetration efficiency. Plus, this ammo would have to rely on explosive charges to create any additional damage inside the target, but not depleted uranium ammo. Its destructive power all comes pretty naturally. However, there's one more reason why depleted uranium is used in ammo, but this reason has nothing to do with its properties. Instead, it has to do with its sheer availability. You see, in the US alone, the Department of Energy has about 750,000 metric tons of depleted uranium in storage. This mind-boggling amount is a result of decades of uranium enrichment processes for nuclear fuel and weapons. Besides the US, 5 other countries are known to produce depleted uranium weapons: China, France, Pakistan, Russia, and the UK. However, only the US and the UK have publicly acknowledged producing and using Du weapons. The last officially confirmed quantities of Du in these countries are as follows: 2,000 tons in China, reported in 2000, 190,000 tons in France, reported in 2001, 460,000 tons in Russia, reported in 1996, 30,000 tons in the UK, reported in 2001. Though there haven't been any official reports for Pakistan, the country's weapons technology is largely based on the production of enriched uranium suitable for nuclear weapons. Today, experts assume that Pakistan has enough highly enriched uranium stocks to make up to 40 nuclear warheads. Of course, given the strides in nuclear production by some of the countries on the list we've just mentioned, it's safe to assume that the actual figures for depleted uranium stockpiles have changed since these reports. For some of the countries, mainly Russia, they've probably changed dramatically. In 2018, it was reported that Russia was arming some of its T-80 tanks with 3BM-60 Svinets-2 Du rounds. Besides the 6 countries producing depleted uranium weapons, at least a dozen more are said to store this valuable material in their arsenal. This includes countries like Japan, South Korea, and Singapore. But what are all these tons of depleted uranium being used for besides ammunition? For military purposes, depleted uranium is most commonly used to produce armor plating for vehicles and equipment with a single goal: to enhance protection against incoming fire. You see, the DU's high density provides exceptional shielding, making it highly effective against armor-piercing projectiles and explosive attacks. So depleted uranium is sandwiched between the sheets of steel armor plate, creating a formidable barrier that combines the DU's density with the steel's structural integrity. You'll find this layered armored system in some late-production M1A1 and M1A2 Abrams tanks built after 1998, where DU models have been integrated into the cobham armor as part of the plating in the front of the turret. There's also an initiative to upgrade older tanks with similar DU-enhanced armor to extend their operational lifespan and improve their defensive capabilities. Depleted uranium can also be used in another protective role: radiation shielding. Although less common, DU-plated protection can prove particularly valuable in medical, industrial, and nuclear settings, where shielding is crucial to protect personnel and equipment from harmful radiation. Another more passive role of depleted uranium in the military-industrial complex is as ballast, a critical component for ensuring proper weight distribution and stability in various military and aerospace applications. Due to its exceptional density, DU is used to precisely balance and stabilize vehicles, fixed-wing aircraft, and other equipment without adding unnecessary bulk or volume. Now, we move to the more destructive roles of depleted uranium, leading to its use in ammo, which has been the primary point of discussion in this video. Given everything you've learned about uranium so far, it shouldn't surprise you that DU is also used in nuclear weapons design. This metal can be used as a tamper or reflector to enhance the efficiency of nuclear fission reactions. To achieve this goal, DU is usually positioned around the fissile core of a nuclear weapon. From this position, it can reflect neutrons into the core, increasing the likelihood of a chain reaction. The result? A significantly more long-lasting, energetic, and efficient explosion that maximizes the destructive potential of the weapon. Another explosive device that benefits from DU is the B-61 nuclear bomb. But in this case, the DU isn't used to ensure maximum yield. Instead, it's sometimes used in the casing of this bomb to help improve its penetration. You see, the B-61 bomb is a so-called bunker-busting bomb designed to penetrate deep into fortified structures before detonating. One of the bomb's latest iterations, the B-61-11, can penetrate frozen soil to a depth of 20 feet. The addition of depleted uranium in the casing increases its density and strength, allowing the bomb to punch through thick concrete and steel barriers without getting crushed upon impact due to the high velocity. With the warhead inside the casing intact, the bomb can safely reach its target and deliver a devastating blow. Depleted uranium missiles can also join the ranks of powerful weaponry produced with this mighty metal. The UK Ministry of Defence confirmed that these missiles had been developed in the US and the UK in the 1970s. Subsequently, they were used in the Gulf War in 1991, in Kosovo in 1999, and during the Iraq War in 2003, just like much of the DU ammo we'll discuss in this video. In the mid-1990s, DU was also used to produce hand grenades and landmines, but those applications have since been discontinued. The same applies to the projectiles used by the US Navy for its 20mm Phalanx CIWS guns, which now use tungsten. By now, you already know the reason behind the production of such weapons. By integrating DU into their designs, these projectiles gain enhanced penetrative capabilities and increased mass, allowing them to pierce even the toughest armor and defenses. This brings us to the use of depleted uranium in various ammunitions. So far, you've learned the why and the who behind the DU ammo production. Now it's time to dive into the what and the where. We'll explore the specific types of ammunition that leverage depleted uranium's unique properties and where these have been deployed on the battlefield. Arguably the most famous use of depleted uranium in ammunition is the 30mm PGU-14B rounds, used in the GAU-8 Avenger rotary cannon primarily mounted on the US Air Force's Fairchild Republic A-10 Thunderbolt II subsonic attack aircraft. The PGU-14B round, weighing about 14 ounces, features a lightweight aluminium shell surrounding it and a DU penetrator core. It achieves a muzzle energy of over 200 kilojoules, sufficient to penetrate the thinner top armor of modern tanks. The GAU-8's firing rate of roughly 3,900 rounds per minute makes it a formidable weapon for close air support. Of course, at this speed, it wouldn't take even 20 seconds of continuous firing to use up all the ammo in the A-10. That's why, in practice, pilots try to limit themselves to 2-second bursts to conserve ammunition and avoid overheating. The depleted uranium has also been used to produce 20mm ammunition for the M61 Vulcan Gatling gun and the M197 rotary cannon. The former ammo was originally used by the US Navy's Phalanx close-in weapon system, and it featured discarding plastic sabots and a DU core. As mentioned, these rounds have since been replaced by tungsten alternatives, but during their service, they offered robust defensive capabilities against aerial threats such as aircraft and missiles. As for the M197 cannon mounted on the AH-1 Cobra helicopter and the AV-8B Harrier, the 20mm DU rounds were primarily used for improved armor-piercing performance. The same can be said for the 25mm DU ammo used in the following systems. 1. The M242 chain gun mounted on the US Army's Bradley fighting vehicle and the Marine Corps' LAV-25. The 25mm DU rounds for this chain gun are designed to penetrate armor with greater efficiency, making them suitable for anti-armor engagements in ground combat. 2. The PGU-20B ammo used by the US Marine Corps in the GAU-12 equalizer cannon of the AV-8B Harrier. This ammunition works wonders in close air support roles, providing a potent response against enemy vehicles and fortifications. 3. The M424 Bushmaster chain gun, used on various armored fighting vehicles including the US Army M2 and M3 Bradley fighting vehicles. Compared to conventional ammunition used with this cannon, the DU ammunition provides an increased capacity to penetrate armor, making it a more lethal choice against more heavily armored targets. The next weapons known to use DU ammunition are the apex predators of ground combat – tanks. As mentioned, the US-made M1 Abrams tanks uses 105 and 120mm DU rounds for high-velocity penetration. Given that the M1 is primarily designed to engage other tanks, it undoubtedly needs all the firepower it can get. The Challenger 1 and 2 tanks, the engineering marvels from the UK, similarly benefit from depleted uranium rounds. These formidable machines fire 120mm DU projectiles, which have been specifically designed to enhance their tank-on-tank combat capabilities. The last notable tanks that rely on DU ammo for that extra punch in battle come from Russia, the T-80 tank series. This series uses the 3BM-59 Svinets-1 and the 3BM-60 Svinets-2 projectiles, which feature DU for improved armor-piercing performance designed for 125mm cannons. All of this ammunition features varying amounts of depleted uranium. The rule is simple: the larger the rounds, the greater the amount of DU in ammunition. So 20mm projectiles use about 6.35 ounces, the 25mm projectiles contain roughly 7 ounces, and their 30mm counterpart has almost 10. However, when you scale up to 105mm or 120mm rounds, the numbers leap dramatically. In these tank-busting shells, the depleted uranium content can even reach 10 pounds per projectile, providing an immense level of mass and density that ensures unrivaled penetration. So far, this immense power has only been witnessed in a few theaters around the world. DU ammunition made its combat debut during the Gulf War, which lasted from 1990 to 91, marking a pivotal moment in modern military warfare. During the conflict, coalition forces fired an estimated 782,414 DU rounds, totaling 350 tons of depleted uranium munitions. These devastating rounds were primarily used by US forces in engagements against Iraqi armor. But while these figures might sound massive, the truth is that DU rounds weren't even the primary weapon that decimated Iraq's tank forces. Out of approximately 3,700 Iraqi tanks destroyed during the war, only 45 were confirmed to have been hit by DU rounds, a kill rate of less than 1 in 7. Much of the heavy tank killing was done by the AGM-65 Maverick air-to-ground missiles and other munitions. The next notable deployment of DU ammunition took place in Bosnia between 1994 and 95. At the time, NATO forces fired approximately 10 tons of DU rounds while intervening in the Bosnian conflict. Though the use of DU was less extensive in this conflict than it had been in Iraq, these rounds still played a significant role in targeting fortified positions in the complex terrain of Bosnia. Almost the same scenario happened a few years later during NATO's intervention in Kosovo between 1998 and 99. Again, about 10 tons of DU ammunition was fired, primarily from aircraft and ground units engaging fortified targets. Fast forward to 2003 and the invasion of Iraq, and we're back to a more extensive use of DU ammunition. Over the course of this 3-week conflict, the US military reportedly used between 1,000 and 2,000 tons of depleted uranium munitions, with over 300,000 separate DU rounds fired. However, even after the invasion, the use of DU ammo in Iraq didn't stop. After all, the invasion was just the first stage of the Iraq War. According to the International Atomic Energy Agency, the US military fired between 170 and 1,700 tons of depleted uranium during this war. For the same conflict, the UK reported firing about 1.9 tons of DU munitions. Since the Iraq War, DU ammo has all but disappeared from the headlines. That is, until it was announced that Ukraine would receive DU ammunition as the Russo-Ukrainian War rages on. The UK was the first to send some to Ukraine in March 2023, together with the Challenger 2 tanks. A few months later, in September 2023, the US followed suit, announcing the first delivery of depleted uranium shells to the war-torn country. The US supplied 120mm DU shells were to be used with the M1 Abrams tanks, which were also supplied to Ukraine by the US. Their primary goal? To fire on enemy targets from greater distances, thus reducing the exposure of Ukrainian tank crews to counterfire. Unsurprisingly, Russia didn't take kindly to the news of DU ammunition being sent to Ukraine. The Russian government condemned the decision, framing it as an escalation in the conflict and a potential threat to both combatants and civilians. Sergei Rybakov, Russia's deputy foreign minister, blasted the US for this move by saying, "This is not just an escalatory step, but it's a reflection of Washington's outrageous disregard for the environmental consequences of using this kind of ammunition in a combat zone. This is, in fact, a criminal act." Now, we're used to Russia's rhetoric often veering into hyperbole. However, this time, the concerns about the environmental and health impacts of depleted uranium might be seen as legitimate. We say might because while there are some valid points about the potential environmental and health risks, the evidence remains mixed. The long-term effects of DU exposure are still the subject of ongoing research and controversy, with studies showing varying levels of impact. With this in mind, let's do a quick overview of these studies and their findings to understand the debate more clearly. Early studies focused solely on uranium exposure. One of the most notable studies from 1994, performed by Lubin and Associates, revealed an increased risk of lung cancer among uranium miners, primarily due to their exposure to radon gas. For the most part, this study established a baseline for understanding uranium's potential health risks. A few years later, a small number of Gulf War veterans with DU fragments were the subject of a 2000 study. The study showed that the veterans had elevated DU levels in their urine, but displayed no observable health effects. Concurrently, some epidemiological studies indicated a small increase in mortality rates among Gulf War veterans, but this wasn't attributed to DU exposure. These findings are especially important because DU contamination was hypothesized as a factor in the so-called Gulf War syndrome, a cluster of chronic symptoms like fatigue and cognitive impairments affecting an estimated 250,000 veterans. However, direct links between this syndrome and DU exposure were never firmly established. The Balkan countries exposed to depleted uranium after Iraq also saw debates regarding its health impacts. Following the Kosovo War in 1999, British biologist Roger Kill suggested that DU contamination might cause up to 10,000 additional cancer deaths in Serbia. However, the evidence remained contested, with some studies showing varying levels of impact and some even failing to detect DU in the environment. After the onset of the Iraq War, the country was again scrutinized for the potential health impacts of DU. Reports emerged linking DU to increases in leukemia, liver and kidney diseases, and birth defects in areas heavily bombarded with DU munitions, such as Fallujah. But again, no definitive causation has been established. Still, concerns about depleted uranium persisted. The United Nations General Assembly ordered a review of DU's health effects in 2007. The review concluded that while depleted uranium has some chemical and radioactive toxicity, the evidence of widespread health impacts from DU exposure remains inconclusive. These findings were pretty much on par with most studies that were yet to come. One of the only studies to actually reach a concrete conclusion was the 2021 study by the University of Portsmouth, which found that DU was not responsible for Gulf War syndrome, instead attributing symptoms to exposure to nerve agents and pesticides. Professor Randall Parrish, research professor of isotope geology at the University of Portsmouth, celebrated the results, saying, "Being able to debunk the alleged connection between this illness and this radioactive substance allows the medical community to focus more clearly on what the likely causes actually are." He added, "It's important to find causes for conditions like this, even if it takes a long time and the causes might be controversial." But despite these and similar findings, the calls to ban DU ammo have never ceased. From the Yugoslav government in 1999 calling the use of these weapons an act of genocide, to the International Coalition to Ban Uranium Weapons, blaming them for prolonging the war into indefinite time due to long-term environmental and health effects, these calls are seemingly only getting louder. And some institutions did listen, with the US Navy, US Marine Corps, and the British Army phasing out some of their DU ammunitions in favor of their conventional counterparts. But given how inferior these are to DU ammo, the question remains, will the operational advantages of depleted uranium be sufficient to override the growing calls for its prohibition, or will the shift towards less hazardous munitions continue to gain momentum? What do you think? Share your predictions in the comments section below. And while you're down there, tell us how you perceive DU ammo in general, as a strategic necessity or a dangerous relic of modern warfare. We're looking forward to reading what you have to say. Now go and check out Why Snipers Avoid Headshots in War, or click this other video instead.